Brody was saying. So would you, and this is to any professor that I would like to answer. I'm sorry for my voice, but would you guys think that there would be like a better impact if Kamala's campaign kind of invested in like Black thinkers rather like Black like popular figures? You know, not necessarily like Beyonce. I think that song was a hit, but like everybody else, I feel like maybe she didn't need to get, because I feel like that's not as much of a long lasting impact, because I feel like Black thinkers that would be pushing a cultural impact or just an educational impact, right, on Black people, right? I feel like would you guys agree, or what's your thoughts on it?
So you're saying that Kamala or any elected official, so the history of America,
like Kamala, like
Kamala in particular, she should have focused on the development of Africology,
like just like her campaign,
and help to give funding to the Africology departments like these.
Consciousness.
She put thinkers in our face instead of entertainers in our face.
Well, she wasn't the Breakfast Club. Like, that was her intellectual foray. And I'm being slightly tongue in cheek, but like, really what this is so Harold Cruz wrote a book in the 70s called The Crisis of the Neurointellectual. And essentially what the upshot of the book was, like, Black intellectuals have essentially like given up on their task, which is really the task of the intellectual to me, is to what I try to do is, I feel especially privileged that as a tenure track professor, like I can spend hours writing and thinking and reading and delving into these texts. Most people are just trying to survive. They don't have time to do that. So I feel like it's part of my moral responsibility as an intellectual to convey that as clearly as I possibly can and as truthfully as I think I can. And Cruz critiqued that. He says essentially Black people in the 60s, they got a slice of the capitalist pie and they said, you know what, I'm going to take this foundation job. I'm going to take this like lofty job in government. Like, that was kind of the whole purpose of the book. Now, I don't really feel comfortable disparaging people for that, because I do believe that at most people's core, most people are going to do what's best for themselves and their families, first and foremost. I think for the average American, I think this is me being, somewhat kind of provocative, but I think for most Americans, I think freedom to them means having a job that allows them to be able to do hood rat stuff with their friends from time to time, maybe go on a trip here and there, like eat out occasionally. Yeah, just like a very we live in a consumer society. So from birth, we're socialized to believe that the mark of a good life is being able to consume in a consumer society. And that's part of the reason we have an empire. The whole point of having an empire is so that you can take resources from around the globe and make sure that the country that is doing the imperialism can provide things to their citizens.
I have a question.
I'd like to respond.
So I was just going to say that I think Kamala did what she could, in the sense that there aren't intellectuals that are stepping up to the plate in the way that I think they should be. That's my strategy.
You have
But I think beyond that,
and then we'll get to you, okay?
I think people need to remember, and I think what this election reminded us, is that this is still a white supremacist nation. And America is still a red country. Like, even when you look at states in terms of, well, these states went blue, when you actually look at like county by county, the majority of the counties are red. And so when you talk about should she add more Black intellectual thinkers, I'd love for her to do that. But the reality is, if she does, how competitive is she going to be in this society where there is an increasing pressure to not talk about race and not talk about issues related to Blackness? I mean, they're shutting down critical race theory. They're shutting down Black studies departments.
Well, you are making a very, very important point. Where you say, can you slow down a bit, because this is good. We don't want to miss that. You said a very poignant and profound point. You have to slow down with it, brother. Say it slowly, please. Go in slowly. Yeah, man. Let me hear. Yes.
What I was saying was that it's still a white supremacist red nation, red state, red country. And so we're living in a time right now where it is politically popular to shut down critical race theory, to shut down anti-racist teachings, to shut down diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. All of that is being shut down. And Kamala's trying to win over a mostly still white nation. and white adjacent nation. So it's like, if that's the type of stuff that he's putting down, and these are things that are costing people elections. I mean, people who promote DEI this election have pretty much been kicked out. People who have been talking about promoting critical race theory have been losing elections. And so if she's trying to be competitive, bringing in more Black intellectual thinkers is the last thing she's going to do. Generally speaking, the response from politicians in general elections when it comes to dealing with Black people is to be critical. And I'm talking Democratic candidates, from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama to Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, is to be critical of Black people. It's to talk about personal responsibility, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, the things that they don't say to anybody else, but they say it to us because it wins votes. And it comes across a certain way that is favorable to poor and working class white voters. So should she have done it? Morally speaking, yes. Practically speaking, if she's trying to win, she ain't gonna do that. No one is.
That's quite
Might
interesting. So
also
you're,
add
you're
that-
talking about strategy then. Strategy. But of course, we talk about being an idealist. I think it's a realist. Okay.
I was gonna
Yes,
just,
no, go
just
ahead.
one.
Yes,
So we
please.
should also remember that diversity is an ideological concept. It actually began on the right. That was originally a conservative idea that eventually got kind of bundled into the Democratic platform. When the idea of diversity, if you go and read like the Bakke decision that essentially created this notion of like diversity as what should be considered like affirmative action, that was a right-wing idea. So I think it's interesting that diversity has gone from a conservative right-wing idea into like a mainstream, like being adopted by the left. I think that's just something we should sit with.
That's good. Yes, yes. And by the way, I just wanted to say real quickly, as it relates to Nixon in 1972, I interviewed a young man in Center City while he was doing his thing, and he said to me, "Oh, I'm not voting for Kamala because Nixon in his meeting said we're going to give African Americans this policy, and they are going to vote for us for 250 years."
Yeah,
So, is that true?
So I actually spent like 2 weeks in the Nixon archives this summer working on my book, and I think Nixon is such a fascinating political figure because we don't give him credit. He's actually a very skilled politician.
Yeah.
And part of the reason he embraced affirmative action was because he knew that it would be divisive. So he knew that if groups had to come to him and essentially compete against one another for resources, that it would essentially destroy the Democratic Party from the inside. So like he kind of preemptively kind of anticipated what was going to come. So I think that he should get credit for being a quite skilled politician in that regard. But I know that, Nixon understood that he knew that how politics works. You had to give people crumbs. You had to give people something to make them feel as though like you were legitimate. And his program was Black capitalism and affirmative action and jobs programs. And he actually did increase investments in education in his first term. By his second term, he had gone fully racist. So he was like, yeah, have that. But like before that, he did actually increase investments.
Thank you so much. This gentleman is going to say, respond. You have a question?
Yeah, I
Go
have a
ahead.
question. So,
Yes.
like you said, you said there's like Black people who are still voting for Trump. And there's people who are like you said, don't really know their stance politically. So my question is, what would you ask or would you tell like a Black person, to like make him or her like decide where they want to be or who's going to serve them better?
Oh, I tell a person.
You want to repeat? Can you say it again? Please repeat. Yes.
So basically, what would you guys say or ask a person or tell them to like persuade them on like their political stance and who would like serve them better?
Okay.
I mean, I don't even know. That's a tough question. I'll just leave it out that way. And I guess this is kind of why it's a tough question. I talked today, Race in the Law, and we talked about the election. And I talked to them about conversations that I've had with people and I've had with students about voting. And I say, okay, so talking to students, what are the issues that impact you, that impact your family, that impact your community, that impact Black people? And invariably, they mean a lot of things. They talk about homelessness, they talk about crime, they talk about mental health, they talk about drugs, they talk about housing and the issues that they have with housing and a bunch of stuff. And then I said, okay, now how does voting solve those problems? And it always goes silent. And so when you say, well, what would I say to the person for them to figure out who they should vote for? I think the first question is, why are you voting, period? And if you don't have a reason why you're doing it, then I think that's kind of the issue too. Or if you're doing it merely because you got told to do it, then that's a problem. If you're voting, there should be a reason why you're doing it. And the reason may be because of, the fact that ancestors struggled for the right to vote, particularly in the South. You're voting because there's a particular candidate who has professed a particular issue that matters to you. And if that's it, then do that. And so in terms of picking who to vote for or whether to vote, I would start off with that. Like, what are the issues that are impacting you? What are the issues that are impacting the community? What are the issues that are impacting the people to the extent that you care? And if a candidate speaks to that, then that should be the candidate that gets a vote. And if there's a candidate that doesn't speak to that, then that candidate should not get your vote.
Thank you so much. I was going to ask you, this is I'm happy you asked that, because I was going to ask the question to each of you. Maybe 5 of you could respond. What is it that you want? What is it that you want to happen in the US election? What policy? What is it that you guys want? Anyone? 2 persons. Tell us what it is that you want. And then I'm going to ask, which candidate provides that for you and why? Maybe, you have to say the why. I'm just interested if we're talking about what people want, yes? Let's see what most of you want. What is it that you want as African Americans here? Yes.
I just want, I want us to be more educated on who we are, and what we've done. I feel like we do a lot, and then it's kind of washed away. So now people think that we didn't do anything. So
Afrocentric education.
You said what?
So an Afrocentric.
Yeah, I feel like it should be more it should be that truth should be probably spread it out, or distributed better. I feel like, I feel like it should be distributed way better, because it's like they almost plan it out so that we don't get that information. Now we thinking, okay, we don't even know what we did. Now it's easy for them to tell us okay, you gotta do this, you gotta do this. It's easy for them to make us not want to vote or care about the politics or whatever. Not saying that. I know you were saying you gotta really know how you vote, but because I can say for myself, I didn't do too much research on the candidates like that. I just know that we just need to be more informed. I feel like, you feel me?
You're saying that education is important and that we need it. Okay, fine. And then you just said and I asked what is it that we want in order to.
I want people to be
No, that's
more,
fine. But what I'm saying is that we talk about consciousness. Do people even know? What's our starting point? We talk about the need to develop a particular kind of consciousness, because African Americans have been discredited, okay, and there have been policies to impoverish us. I was in DC and we talked about the policy in terms of ensuring that certain houses remain when you appraise certain houses. If African Americans come out of the house, then it's appraised differently. And who are the appraisers? 99.9% of appraisers are Caucasian, and they view African American values and household a certain way, and they carry that. So part of the problem, we have too many Caucasians doing appraisals. We need to balance that out. Maybe that is something that we could. That is changed to policy, is it? And what affects policy? Elections.
So I would suggest one text. I signed this in my African American political thought class. It's called "What the Negro Wants." So it was a book that was written in 1944, I believe it was, by I think he's a sociologist, Rayford Logan. And in the book, he talks to a host of different Black activists. So he talks to Mary Bethune, he talks to April Randolph, all different sorts of Black activists. And in that book, they're asking essentially the questions we're discussing now. So what is it that when they talk about housing, they talk about what that might look like. They talk about how do you organize an economy. They talk about the role of education in that. So I would highly recommend checking out that book. I think a lot of the points that you're making are kind of covered in and obviously it's 1944, so a lot of the things that they're considering may not necessarily be as timely, but thematically, I think that's something that we need to collectively do more of, is kind of have that question. What does the Black person want?
All right, many questions. Let's go with this. Dr. Flannery.
Great.
Dr. Flannery, I've never met you before. Hi. How are you? Yes, sorry about that. Dr. Flannery, go
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you so much. So I've been listening to a lot of the free Black media, the podcasters, the Black media. And I think we could be underestimating why Black people voted or didn't vote a certain way based off the grassroots conversation. But I do want to fact check really quick before I make my point, because I heard you say that there was like this large number of Black people that voted Republican this election. And I believe that to be true. But when I checked the polls this morning, it said that Black people still 86% voted Kamala, which is almost the exact same who voted for Biden. So where's this large number of Black people who voted Republican?
No, I didn't say that a large number. I said the largest number since the 1930s of people who were going Republican. Black people still in the main vote Democrat, but there were more from my, I mean, I'll double check the number, but from what I saw, there were more African Americans from a percentage that went
Republican. But it only moved the number like a 1%. I was disappointed in that. I say this because I don't think Black people as are uninformed as you were suggesting, that we're just voting because we don't know what's going on. I don't believe that. I also don't believe that Black people were voting this election only thinking about Trump and Kamala. What I have been listening to the last few months in terms of the free Black media, podcasters, whatever, is Black people were having, thousands of Black people having conversations that they were on code deciding we need to consciously let the Democrats crash and burn. They need to know that they can't take our vote for granted. There was thousands of people saying they were either going to vote for Trump or not vote at all on purpose, not because they preferred Trump, Kamala, but because they wanted to debase the Democratic Party so that they could, in the next election, that both the Republicans and the Democrats would have to vie for their vote. And Black people have been talking about reparations constantly. So, but then I was disappointed when I looked. First, I was like, oh, Kamala lost. Like the grassroots, they really did unplug the Democratic Party. But then I was like, it was still 86% Black people voted for the Democrats. So I don't know if the organizing of the grassroots to intentionally not support the Democrats is going to be meaningful in the next election if the numbers didn't move. But I don't think Black people just voted based off if they like Kamala or Trump or based off just being uninformed. I think we have been thinking about the next 20 years, 50 years, and what is it going to take to change the electoral process in relation to Black people as a group in this country, particularly in the conversation on reparations. Have you been hearing some of these conversations?
All right, hold on now. A follow-up question to you. You said, well, I know you talk about, both of you have been talking about the number of people that vote in terms of African Americans. What about white Americans? Was that you find more people, more people came out to vote? Because there's also the issue of demographic changes in the US, and I'm part of SRBI, and we did that study that looks at the demographic change in the US, which will begin, it was supposed to start in 2025, it will now start in 2045. That's a real fear. So do you think that people voted for Trump or more white people, but I don't know the data. Any suggestion, any conversation?
I really didn't know about them. I'm just talking about the Black vote first,
Yeah.
but I think it is an important question.
Yeah.
But I wondered if other people have heard these conversations where thousands of Black people are like, we are not voting for Democrats so we can get the attention of the electoral process.
There are many people who want to speak. So what we're going to do is, hold on. We're going to have no, I know. Give me a second. Our panelists will respond. Then you will respond because you have your hand up. And then Jen and Sarah, you will respond. And then you're behind me. Oh, you're behind, so I can't see you. But it's going to be our panelists, you, sir, and you, sir. All right? Go ahead.
Okay, so I appreciate everything that you said. I don't think that I gave the impression that Black people were uninformed or voting uninformed. If I did, I certainly apologize.
Oh,
It's
no.
not.
I'm saying
I think
people informed. I'm just saying like people like more education will like stop that like cycle that we in. You know what I'm saying?
I think the conversation about Black people voting is a very important conversation in terms of it being strategic. And so, I mean, I'll be fully frank. I'm one of those Black people that did not vote for that very reason. And I think there needs to be a serious conversation about why more people, and Black people in particular, are exempting themselves from participating in the electoral process. Because as I said at the outstart, we've been voting for 50 plus years, and the country has been headed the same exact way. And I think part of the problem has to do with the fact that the Democratic Party has expected of Black vote,
For sure.
and they don't work for it at all. And so and this is honestly part of the reason why, and I think it also speaks to what you said, where you do have African Americans voting for Trump. Now, is Trump going to help Black people? No. But it's this idea that the Democratic Party has been expecting the Black vote and not having to work for it at all. And I do think that African Americans need to be a lot more strategic with their vote and saying, you have to come up with policies for us. And if you do not come up with policies for us, we are not going to vote for you. We don't care. Because at the end of the day, I think largely the condition of African Americans has remained regardless of who has occupied the White House. And I think candidates need to be reminded of that. So I think that's an excellent point with regards to African Americans who decided not to vote for Harris. And I think that more Black people really need to do that. And I think that there needs to be, just like the Democrats and the Republicans compete for every other demographic, they should be made to compete for Black votes as well.
Yep. Thank you so much. Wow, this is great. Organization with intent. Who is next? Yes.
So I want to preface by saying I have two questions. Either can answer which one you feel best you want to answer. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Ruben Wahab. He's like,
yeah.
So you guys are historians and all that. So you guys already know that he was part of Panther 21, the split of PPP.
Wait, hold up. You're speaking so fast.
I got you.
Yes. And what's your name, sir?
Zach.
Zach, thank you. Go ahead.
So the Black Panther Party splits. They formed the BLA. Panther 21 happened where they accused 21 former Black Panthers who are part of the BLA, Black Liberation Army, with, I believe, trying to bomb a particular building. So Charles Shakur gets sent to Cuba. A lot of different Panthers get bailed out, so on and so forth. But the Ruben Ahad, still alive, still growing, still building, organizing. He has a sort of way he feels that we can gain a sort of solution within this sort of like capitalist system that we live in. And he sort of defines it as a united front against fascism. So I want to ask you guys, what are your sort of, have you ever heard the term? And also, what do you guys think about building a united front against fascism? We do see that white terrorist aggression has been on an all-time high in the United States. We do see that police terror has been increasing year after year. 1,000 people die from police every year. We see that, I think this year the number increased.
Just Black people?
There's a percentage of Black people in it, but just in general. But Black people, again, are also harassed by police at higher rates, so on and so forth. So we see that. So that's my sort of question in terms of what do you guys see in terms of merits of like a united front against fascism, and how do you think that would look like?
Okay.
And then there's the other question I may have. How do you see?
Wait, hold on. Can you hold that second one?
Yeah.
And then just so you know, we are. It's 6:40. I think we're supposed to finish at 7.
I'll stick with the first question.
Okay, so let's go. And then we're gonna have this is gonna be part 1. We have to have a part 2, Dr. Mazama. But who wants to take? You want to take it?
So essentially, your question is like, what is my thought on the notion of the united front?
Yes.
So I would say united front against fascism. I would say firstly, I think there is not a clear kind of agreement as to like what qualifies as fascism. So like we think about fascism as kind of a historical formation, kind of arising in Italy and part in Germany, in kind of that European formation. Like it was a particular expression of capitalism after World War I that I think is in a lot of ways kind of historically bound. So like, what do we do with the capitalism now that pretty much doesn't care about borders anymore? That was kind of the point of globalization. So you can't run from it. Like it goes pretty much, it's everywhere now. Including the People's Republic of China, which still considers itself a socialist country. I mean, it's very much a clear kind of model of capitalism. So like, what are we uniting against? And so like, I'm not gonna say I'm against it, but I think going back to my original question is like, I do think there needs to be some of the politics really is in this question of like, what do we want? What are we fighting for? And I think that's often taken for granted because we use terms like freedom, equality, and justice and things like that. But like, I think we need to be a little bit more tactical, actually a lot more tactical about what that means before we jump onto, like, to me, the United Front is a tactic.
Yeah.
But like tactics aren't ends in themselves, like they are means to ends. And my question is, we don't know what the ends are. So like, what is the function of the tactic? Or what would the function of the tactic be? Just to stop Trump? Is that all that does? Like, I don't, yeah.
When he talked about white terrorist aggression, which is becoming which is growing rapidly. So I guess for you is we have to challenge or mitigate that.
So fair.
with
So the
the
question
similar with the black sorry, I don't use the term black unless I'm talking about
So the question.
African American response. Is that what you're saying?
I just, yeah.
So then, okay, if that's the case, like, let's say we want to stop the problem. Okay, how do we do that? Do we use some mechanism? Like, we give the state more power. The
Well,
state that already has the power to surveil us day in and day out. So, like, what is
I was
the?
saying Garuba sort of understands it as he's seeing the current and not, well, he's analyzing the sort of like conditions that we're in right now. And he sees a lot of sort of, as you guys talked about, a lot of black bourgeois politicians are in positions of power that they don't serve us. And so he's seeing that because the Black Panther Party was the first party to have a united front against fascism, and they didn't do it just because of like, well, we just want to stop fascists from coming and then nothing afterwards.
Right.
They wanted to build something stronger
Strategic,
after.
yeah.
So Garuba is following in that tradition of like, well, let's revive this because if we're one of the first black radical organizations to do it in the United States, is there still merit? And he's basically basically says there's merits to like having it. I'm asking you guys, do you think there's still merits to sort of bringing back that united front?
Yes, but the caveat being like, I think that's a tactic. And so like the question is like, to what ends? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to get democratic socialism? Or are we just trying to stop the problem? It's like, what?
You would say communism. You would say, you say black liberation.
Well, to me, even black liberation is still not precise enough, especially under global capitalism, where that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I don't think we have, kind of to this point, like we do lack historical knowledge to really like pinpoint what that is. So I do think that there does need to be this kind of like historical knowledge building so people can have some sense of, especially if you want to think of it as being a black freedom struggle, something that is over the long array, you have to have some sense of what people in the past were fighting for to know if it's something that can be picked up or something that needs to be reconsidered, something that needs to be reevaluated. So it's kind of hard to just answer that question kind of abstractly without some clear sense of like what the goals are.
Right. And you use the word united. How united can we be within the political divide? Think about that. Yes.
This is back to your earlier question when you asked what do people want from movement.
Yes.
I think that's pretty simple with reparations. I think everything else is just attempting like a nuance of something that's pretty simple. The whole point of, I guess, a scare tactic that you'll let people, like we were talking about the police and all that, you then on that. Like, you can't hold that to nobody's head. If you scared, get a gun. I think it was Ali B. Wells that said on the door front that every black revolution is a gun or something like that. And then you spoke about freedom and that it looks different. Particularly in America, I guess you ask, I think what freedom is simple. I think how you get freedom is different. Like in Haiti, for the revolution, I think that's pretty simple. Like, yo, we enslaved, don't want to be anymore. And slavery was something economic. So I think how you, like the conditions imposed on people, black people, was something economic, among other things. But I think the first thing is economic. The guy that was saying earlier was talking about education. Well, we do give reparations. We can have our own self-determination and do what we want. Like he said too, black people aren't a model. But I think at the core of what black people going through is something economically. And a last point too, from 1964 to 1992, black politicians grew from 108 to 8,000, but the condition of black people actually got worse. So I think again, economics, so that we could have our own self-determination is at the key, and that's reparation. That's why I didn't believe it. And I think until black people get something specific that's not BS talk, that they get black people.
I have a question as you get to wrap up that I was supposed to ask, and this quite I would love to. I don't know if we have time to invoke Professor Jason Hill from DePaul University, who is against reparation. I don't know if I have time for that. That was deep. We don't have time for that. It's deep. But I have. It's deep. We don't have. But I have a question. I said, how effective have policies like the Voting Rights Act, affirmative action, DEI initiatives, Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, in addressing economic and social disparities of African Americans? Just so you know, there are those who look to economics, but there are those who look to the spirituality, African spirituality, decolonization. And of course, Bob Marley said, I look to the I, okay, and they created his own religion. Okay, what? So that's an interesting question. Any response to the gentleman, sir, professor? And sorry.
Is this for them? The question is for them, or is this
anyone?
Okay, I'll answer to the DEI.
Yes.
I think I witnessed this after George Floyd. George Floyd is where I'm from in Texas in Third Ward. So this idea of DEI was also a form of white accommodationism, especially around the time when people started compiling anti-racism resources for white people to better understand the conditions of Black people that they have long since ignored. And so these ideas or these concessions or these illusions of, well, we've got to work better to understand each other. We got to work better to truly look at ourselves as human beings and different things. And one thing, the casualty of that is that somehow when we're talking about African people or displaced African people, somehow we're no longer talking about humanity, or when Blackness as a concept is brought forth or put forth, and we're no longer talking about humanity. And I think a casualty in DEI is something that was actually beneficial to white people. And one thing I noticed as a graduate and alumnus of the University of Texas at Austin is that a lot of those programs went beyond giving people information about how Black people were experiencing the political landscape of Austin, which is majority white, and the Black student population hadn't risen above 3% since they allowed Black students to be admitted into the university, that a lot of the cultural initiatives there went beyond giving information to white people, and those were only felt by the students. And what I mean by that is that there were initiatives put in place for us to understand each other and to get to know each other. So you had international students from the continent being in conversation with students who have grown up here. And so, but also the casualty is that that is what DEI was read as. DEI was read as giving people information about how they think Black people live, and that's the end of it. And that's where it stopped. And my question around like Black existence and African existence, or the displacement of African existence here in the United States, is that if we are to truly become into solidarity with these people, because there has been a history of white solidarity with African people. However, I feel like white people do not live in a space of they think they know and that's it. And my issue or my stance right now is to not get white people on my side. I actually think we should do away with that ideology. But I say all of this to say is that we collectively cannot continue to operate from a place of it's not that deep. Like what the brother is saying here with the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party has been written off as misogynistic, patriarchal, and that's why their ideas, Huey P. Newton's idea of intercommunalism has not been engaged, because we've already written off these intellectuals historically. And so even with DEI initiatives,
5 seconds.
You got it. DEI initiatives, those ideologies have been written off for their methods. So to point to your point, I actually do think armed revolution is a step in the right direction. Free aside of your
We're going in the US?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So we're talking. So you make this differentiation between revolutionary change as against linear change. What does change look like within the context of the US? Within the context of a people? What does it look like? I mean, we don't have much time, but I want my panelists to wrap up the debate today. And if you want to respond to him, go ahead.
So I don't know if you were here when I was mentioned this earlier, but I mentioned that diversity is an ideology itself. Has a conservative origin. So if you read the Bakke decision, essentially what the Supreme Court says was like diversity is good for America because it essentially helps people to learn to be multicultural and learn how to, engage with people in the market economy, et cetera, et cetera. So like it's always had a conservative origin. It later got co-opted as multiculturalism in the 90s, and then as diversity really around the world. So that has a historical through line. So your question is, what was your question again? To kind of wrap up. Oh, yeah.
It was about change.
And
what does change look like?
And yes, and all the other policies that have.
Yes.
Like
So
voting rights, affirmative, and so on and so forth.
yes. So I actually think if we take the Voting Rights Act, so I think we sometimes dehistoricize or take the context of these acts out. I mean, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act explicitly were not meant to do anything about economic justice, which is why King and Bayard Rustin, and say what you want about all these figures, you can disagree with them, but like they were all adamant that focusing or bifurcating these two things in this way was only going to harm Black people, because they knew that if you didn't get it all at once, it probably wasn't going to happen. So like there was an understanding pretty early on that Voting Rights Act and civil rights weren't going to address economic. It was attempting to do a very specific thing, which was integrate Black people into liberal capitalism.
Right.
Now, do we think that that's what we should want as a collective? So, I mean, I can't say yes or no. Everybody has to decide for themselves if being incorporated into a liberal capitalist imperialist order is.
But that's the problem. What you just said create a problem too. You said everyone has to decide.
No, but yeah, but that's.
But then
but
when
that's
they do
politics.
decide, it creates. I mean, if everybody gets to decide for themselves, then we're gonna have a divide. It's gonna
Well,
be
so
a
here's the
splinter of people
well,
all
so
over the
you're-
place, and you're talking about a united front.
Well,
How
here's,
does-
so here's the thing. Like, you can get consensus one of two ways. You can impose it or you can create it. I tend to think creating it, which would require disagreement, would require listening to different perspectives and trying to forge something is much more, in the long term, much more efficacious than it being imposed from above. Especially in a country that claims that we live in a free society. Imposition is not going to do that. So
Thank you so much. And of course, Dr. Zamir, in response to the gentleman and all these ideas about DEI. I mean, actually, you did respond in a sense, but any final response?
Yes. I mean, I think I want to echo my co-panelist who said that diversity was, the concept of diversity was a right-wing concept, and that the Justice Booth Powell's decision in Boston was very much concerned about setting the United States apart from the USSR. So he said that in the United States, we believe in diversity, in the USSR, they don't. So certainly not out of any desire to help Black people. In fact, in many respects, the diversity rationale was to enrich the educational experience of white people by having Black folks in the class. And I think diversity now, in many respects, has become a hustle. There's a whole industry behind it. And of course, once you put industry behind it, then they're not actually interested in eradicating the problem because then industry died with it. I think one of the biggest problems with conversations about race in diversity circles, outside of diversity circles, is that there's no discussion of history. And so if you're not talking about history, then it's very, very easy for the United States Supreme Court to write a narrative of racism that includes anti-white racism. It's very easy for the United States Supreme Court to write, and not just the court, but everybody, to write narratives that completely deny the impact of slavery, the impact of Jim Crow, the impact of the violence of the time. And so, I mean, even when I listened to, I forget who said it, talking about white supremacy being, or white terrorism being at an all-time high. It really isn't. Like when you look at 1880 and 1940, a Black person being lynched once every 4 days between 1889 and 1929, two to three times a week between 1890 and 1917. And they were public spectacles. They were announced in newspapers. They were planned in advance. They took pictures and photographs and sent postcards to each other, showing Black people being lynched and tortured and murdered and burned and all that section. So it hasn't ended, I guess, is my point. And so what does change look like? I don't know. It would be lovely. It would be lovely to live in a world where social hierarchies do not exist. We're nowhere near close to that. But you know, as far as the question regarding the United Black Front, I'm for any group of people that are genuinely trying to find a way to deal with the problems that we're doing. And the fact is, I don't agree with every solution that's out there, but I don't know everything and I don't know the answer. So if you're trying in some way, shape, or form, then I respect it. And I think I'll wrap up there.
Wow, this is powerful. There's so many questions. I mean, I have much more to ask. Talk about Haiti. Don't get me started on Haiti. Haiti is clamoring for a Haitian-led solution. Where is the support? Where are the other African Americans all over the world helping them, clamoring for that? We have a petition. Okay, if you're interested, please call me and talk to me. But this was great. Thank you guys so much. We have to continue conversations. Hopefully, we can have more conversations like this. We really want to have more conversations. We're not done because Dr. Mazama, who is the chair of the Africology African American Department, will come and do the vote of thanks and appreciation and so on. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me to moderate. It was an amazing opportunity. Thank you.
I want to tell you we'll be back here next Wednesday at 3:30 to talk about the Ghana Summer program that we are offering out of this department. because we think it's very important to go to the continent and see for ourselves what's going on. So there are some cards here, and Wednesday, 3:30 to 4:50. And after on the 15th, I think you want to talk about it?
Yes, we have an alumni speaker
Why don't you
series
stand
event.
up?
I'm sorry, everyone. I'm a little tired, but we have an alumni speakers series event on the 15th, where we're going to have a former graduate from our department who works at CCP's named Corey Delaney, and he's going to be speaking about the connection between what he learned in the department and how that has set him apart in his field. He works with college-age Black and brown men at CCP. And he talks to them about, the importance of purpose and whatnot when it comes to, furthering your education and finding out where you are as you age. So I implore you all to come to that event because it's going to be one of many, but it also is going to be an event that it really highlights what sets our department from the others because typically departments won't tell you how you can ingratiate yourself and set yourself apart with what you learned within the context of their department. So come on through.
What time?
5:30.
What is beautiful about our students is that we instill in them a strong sense that they have to give to the community, the grassroots you're talking about. And so Carl is the perfect example of that not the only one. So hopefully that will inspire you and invite you. And then we have Kwanzaa coming up on December 3rd.
December 3rd, right here in this room. What time is it?
3 to 5.
3 to 5, we're gonna do a Kwanzaa. So everybody's invited, other departments invited, student food, celebration, and some reflections for the end of the year.
Yes, enjoy that. You come back?
Yeah, I'd love
Really?
to.
Yeah. It's your home, I know. Yeah, we
Okay, so it's hot here. I'm leaving early. You are? Yeah, I gotta Alright, bro.
It's another like okay. You guys are running it? You guys gonna be here? Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna go.
All right, so
That was good. I think they did a great job. It was like so funny how like the article we took by class. Because she gives us two opposing articles. And I took notes like one opposing articles. You're sitting here. So it's good to see everybody out. How you doing? Namumba? Namumba? That is Renaldo. Are you still? I give up my
Like yesterday they called up. I had to work all day. But the thing is,
No. It's a artist.
I was able to call you.
but give me your contact. It's hard.
It's a
Yes, it was great. Thank you so much. Yes. I was in my I love this. This is great. Yeah, man. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. I did record it. Guys, if you are still watching, thank you so much. And we're gonna it's gonna be in the audio podcast. Edited and we're gonna make it available on Saturday. And we're gonna get the audio. Okay, you guys started halfway through the event. We're gonna fix that for you so you can keep going. Thank you guys so much. Walk good.